With Colorado school board elections on the horizon, races in areas like Jeffco, Denver, and Aurora are heating up. Finance reports are in, and they show large amounts of money being funneled into various campaigns. Historically, these type of elections seem to go unnoticed and are of low interest. Eric, what are your thoughts on this? I know education is a big thing for a lot of people. What do you think?
Well, historically was a number of years ago. The idea that school board races are attracting substantial money is not something that just happened in 2015. If you go back 10, 20 years, you're absolutely right, Gabrielle. But over that period of time, these races have become increasingly hot. I guess my analysis is just as the country has polarized on so many other issues, left, right, we've polarized around education too. Now the lines are not the same lines that they are around other political issues. And around some ed reform issues, you have this unusual coalition of free market conservatives with Barack Obama and Arne Duncan and some of the incumbent class in Washington, D.C. But there is definitely a polarized divide out there about education issues. You see it in Jefferson County, you see it in Douglas County, and you see it in the city and county of Denver as well, and it's going to spread elsewhere in the state. Aurora Public Schools was subject to a recent report that came out maybe 10 days ago, a very damning report about the quality of that product, and a whole coalition of people coming together to talk about what needs to take place in Aurora. I have long contended that the real challenge, DPS gets so much of the attention, and DPS is doing some interesting, very positive things. But the real problem of quality education around here is among those inner ring suburbs, of whether it's Aurora or Thornton or run the list. Obviously the Jeffco, I'll wrap this up, but obviously the Jeffco recalls are very hot, attracting a lot of money. And I thought it was interesting that the Denver Post did opine editorially that this recall was out of place. For those of us who thought the gun recalls were a step too far, now the chickens are coming home to roost, and you have people on the left trying to recall some conservatives. Recalls, in my mind, should be saved for extraordinary circumstances. This is not it in Jeffco.
Ben, what's your quick take on this? I know reform is a word that keeps coming up in a lot of these discussions with the school board elections. What are your thoughts?
Well, reform is an interesting word, particularly when you look in DPS, where the reform crowd, depending on who you believe, has been in power for at least a decade. I would argue for significantly longer than that. You know, my take, and all these elections are really fascinating, whether you want to talk about DPS, school board, where there's a possibility we'll have a unanimous board, and really, you could argue a total loss of democracy when it comes to how DPS is governed. Certainly in Jefferson County, it's going to be contentious with the recall. I was surprised that the Denver Post yesterday came out and editorialized against the recall. I think maybe they wanted to get rid of those last pesky liberal subscribers they had. You know, personally, to me, if I wanted to get on a soapbox and talk about what's important with these issues, I think the fact that there is no real campaign finance rules or laws with the school board races is a travesty. I think it's led to some of the problems that we have in Denver, where I know the most about, and I'd like to see a change there so that people can't pump unlimited money into these campaigns.
All right, Patty, what are your thoughts on what's happening with the school board election? Seems like a lot of people are paying attention this time around.
Well, and that's good. I mean, I think we've seen many elections where we don't have enough people pay attention, and if it takes Bernie Sanders and it takes Donald Trump on the national scene, and it takes recall campaign, which is partly misguided, partly you understand where they're coming from, but if people are talking and thinking more about it, that's good, because we've seen way too many decades where people are paying no attention at all to these smaller elections. So, but Ben's absolutely right in the fact that there's way too much money being spent on it too. It would be better to just like be standing in the local grocery store and yelling at your neighbors.
David, I'll let you wrap this one up for us.
It's completely rational for the national unions to pump huge amounts of money into things like the Jeffco recall. They've already had the loss of lots of school choice, like charter schools and things like that, in inner cities. And this reform spreading to suburban school districts, as in Douglas County and in Jefferson County, is an existential threat to their system of the schools being run for the benefit of the union rather than for the benefit of families in an inclusive way that respects the diversity of different children and different learning styles. Jeffco built, the current board built a new school without having to borrow any money. Do you know what a threat that kind of behavior is to that whole iron triangle of the bond lawyers and everything else? So of course they're putting money into it, and it's a very smart move from their point of view. And also the Independence Institute is also spending its own resources in public education on this issue, because we think that the board is going in the right direction of reform, diversity, and inclusiveness.